Hi, it's Jess Pryles with Hardcore Carnivore, and today I'm going to show you how to cook a brisket. Brisket is the crown jewel of Texas barbecue, but it can be really difficult to master. It's a tough one to cook because it's comprised of two different muscles and you have to cook them both to perfection at the same time. One of the most important steps is choosing the right meat to start with. So you're gonna need a whole packer cut brisket. So it's called packer cut because it's not actually trimmed at all and it comes directly from the packing plants like that. You wanna choose one that's around 13 to 15 pounds. Any smaller and you're just gonna have a really tough time making sure it doesn't turn into leather. It'll dry out really easily. The other really important thing when it comes to picking your brisket is meat grade or quality. I'm using an H-E-B Prime 1 brisket today. They have lots of different prime options in store for their brisket. They have flats and they have trim points for you to make burnt ends out of, and they even have chunks, but we're gonna be using the commodity or packer cut today. So prime beef is literally the top 10% of all the beef in the United States. It's highly prized for its superior marbling, and that translates to tenderness and a ton of flavor. When it comes to brisket, using that higher quality grade is gonna make a huge difference because all of that intramuscular fat and marbling is gonna render out during cooking and baste the meat, which is gonna help it prevent drying out. And I think we can all agree, no one's got time for dry brisket. Here is my prime packer cut brisket. You can see the lean flat muscle over here, and this is actually the bottom. And then if I flip it over, you'll see the chunky point end. This is where fatty brisket is cut from. When trimming a brisket, the main aim is to thin out those really thick fat seams in the meat because they're not gonna render out properly during cooking. Trimming is something that definitely gets easier with practice, and the easiest way to find the fat is by feel. I run my hands along the brisket to feel for any hard fat seams and trim away. It's also easier to make smaller, thinner cuts, so you can just cut away a little at a time. Remember, you can always cut more off, but you can't stick it back on. I'm looking for an overall fat thickness of about 1/4 inch. Once the brisket is trimmed, it's time to season it, and I usually do this step about 30 minutes before it's time to hit the smoker. I recommend you use an offset smoker or pellet grill for this, but whatever you choose to use, just make sure that that smoke and heat are indirect. When it comes to wood, post oak is the most traditional wood to use, but you could also use hickory or a mesquite blend. I'm seasoning the brisket with H-E-B's True Texas BBQ Salt and Pepper Blend and Hardcore Carnivore Black Seasoning. This combo is gonna help me get that great bark and crust on that brisket. I'm starting with a really generous amount of the salt and pepper, making sure to coat the sides really well, and then I finish with a coat of the Hardcore Carnivore Black. So my smoker is running between 225 and 250 degrees, and I'm gonna put the brisket straight in. And if you're using an offset smoker, make sure you put that thick point end towards the firebox. Okay, so now I'm gonna do absolutely nothing. I'm just gonna leave it alone for like 7 to 8 hours. Don't touch it, don't look at it, don't open it, don't bother it, just let it do its thing. Trust me. After about 8 hours, the brisket has developed an amazing crust. It's softened up a little bit, but there's still some real resistance and firmness there, but we're about to fix that. I'm using a meat thermometer to check the temperature of the brisket, and I'm gonna insert it at the thickest part of that point muscle, and when it reads 165 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, it's time to wrap. I'm wrapping the brisket in uncoated butcher's paper and returning it to the smoker. This is gonna protect it for the rest of the cook. The key is to wrap the paper really nice and tight. So because we're cooking at such low temperatures, the paper won't burn, and it's actually preferable to foil because it lets air in and out. It's porous, so it's not gonna steam off all that bark that we worked so hard to create. So now I'm just gonna let the brisket finish cooking, and I'm gonna cook it until it reaches about 203 to 205 degrees at that thickest point of the point muscle, and you can either keep checking it with a thermometer or just leave a probe in there to monitor the temp. Once the brisket is at the temp or the feel that I'm looking for, I'm gonna remove it from the smoker and put it into a cooler wrapped in an old towel. This is a hugely important step. This is the resting part. And don't worry, it's gonna stay nice and toasty warm in there. I leave my brisket to rest for at least 2 hours, but you can let it hold in the cooler for up to 6 hours. It just needs to stay above 140 degrees to be safe. And once it's rested, it's time to enjoy the glorious fruits of your labors. Crusted with peppery bark, a killer smoke ring, and loaded with perfectly rendered fat is a tender and moist prime beef brisket. I slice the flat into pencil-thin slices and you can cube up the point for burnt ends or just enjoy it exactly as is. It's not hard to see why brisket is the king of all barbecue meats. Okay, go forth and brisket, and don't forget to check out HEB's YouTube channel for more great recipes.